Story 1. The Ghost Ship's Whisper. I am the merry Celeste, a brigantine carved from sturdy oak, born to dance across the Atlantic's wild waves. My timbers creaked with stories, but none so chilling as the voyage of November 1872. I speak now, my voice a hollow echo from the deep, to tell you what no man's log could capture. The sea keeps its secrets, but tonight I will share mine. Brace yourself, for this tale is no gentle lullaby. It is a descent into the shadows that claimed my crew and left me a ghost adrift in legend. It began in New York's bustling harbor, where I lay heavy with 1,701 barrels of cargo, their wooden staves groaning under the weight. Captain Benjamin Briggs, a man of steady eyes and iron will, stood at my helm. His wife, Sarah, clutched their daughter, Sophia, a bright-eyed child of 2, her laughter a fleeting warmth against the autumn chill. 7 crewmen, hardened sailors with calloused hands, hauled my lines and raised my sails. We set out for Genoa on November 7th, the wind sharp and eager, promising a swift crossing. But the Atlantic is a jealous beast, and it does not suffer plans lightly. 2 weeks into the voyage, the sea turned feral. Storms clawed at my sails, tearing canvas and snapping rigging. The crew fought to secure me, their shouts swallowed by the gale's roar. Below decks, Sarah sang to Sophia, her voice trembling as my hull shuddered under the waves' assault. The cargo hold, packed tight with barrels, creaked ominously, the air thick with the tang of salt water. I felt the weight of it all, their trust, their fear, their fragile hope. But something else stirred too, a presence, cold and formless, slithering through my planks like a shadow cast by no light. By November 24th, the storm had relented, leaving a bruised sky and a restless sea. The crew moved with weary precision, repairing my bilge pump, checking the barrels, and logging our position, 600 miles west of the Azores. Briggs stood at my wheel, his face etched with exhaustion but resolute. Sarah sat nearby, sketching in her journal, while Sophia played with a small wooden horse. The men spoke little, their eyes darting to the horizon as if sensing what I already knew. We were not alone. That night, the air grew heavy, not with storm, but with an unnatural stillness. My lanterns flickered without wind, casting jagged shadows across the deck. The crew's footsteps faltered as they patrolled, their breaths visible in the sudden chill. I felt it then, a whisper not of sound, but of intent, coiling through my timbers. It came from the hold, where the barrels stood silent, their contents sealed tight. But one barrel, marked with a faint, uneven scratch, seemed to pulse, as if alive. I tried to warn them, to groan louder, to shift beneath their feet. But ships do not speak in ways men understand. At midnight, the first man vanished. Jonah, the youngest sailor, barely 20, was on watch. He'd been whistling softly, a habit that annoyed the others but soothed his nerves. Then, silence. The crew searched, calling his name, their voices sharp with unease. They found nothing, no trace, no splash, no sign he'd gone overboard. His pipe lay on the deck, still warm as if he'd set it down moments before. The men exchanged glances, their hands tightening on their knives. Sarah clutched Sophia closer, her eyes wide with questions she dared not voice. The next night, it took another. Elias, the ship's cook, was in the galley, preparing a meager supper of hardtack and dried fish. The crew heard a single, sharp cry, more surprise than pain, then nothing. They found the galley empty, a knife stuck in the cutting board, its blade gleaming as if untouched. The air smelled of salt and something acrid, like burnt rope. Briggs ordered the men to stay in pairs, but fear had already taken root. They whispered of curses, of sea devils, of things older than the ocean itself. I felt their panic, their heartbeats echoing through my deck, but I could do nothing. The presence grew stronger, its whispers now a low hum, emanating from that marked barrel in the hold. By November 25th, the log noted our position, but Briggs' handwriting faltered. The ink smudged as if his hand shook. The crew's morale was fraying. They avoided the hold, claiming it felt wrong. One man, Samuel, swore he saw shadows moving behind the barrels, shapes that did not match the lantern's glow. Another, Thomas, claimed the sea itself was watching, its waves curling too deliberately like fingers reaching for the hull. I felt it too. The water around me was no longer just water. It pressed against my sides, not with force, but with intent, as if testing my strength. That night, the thing struck again. Two men, brothers named Caleb and Isaac, were checking the rigging. A scream split the darkness, followed by a sickening thud. The crew rushed to the deck, finding only Isaac's boots, neatly placed side by side as if he'd stepped out of them and vanished. Caleb was gone. The men's faces were ashen, their hands trembling as they gripped their tools like weapons. Briggs, his voice steady but strained, ordered a full search of the ship. They scoured every inch, cabins, forecastle, hold, but found only the ordinary. Charts scattered, a half-eaten meal, Sophia's wooden horse abandoned on a bunk. The lifeboat remained lashed to the deck, untouched. The presence was no longer subtle. It moved through me freely now, a cold weight that settled in my beams. The crew felt it too, their eyes darting to corners, their voices hushed. Sarah stopped singing, her sketches now frantic scribbles of jagged lines and eyeless faces. Sophia no longer laughed. She clung to her mother, whispering of the cold man who watched her from the shadows. Briggs, ever the captain, tried to maintain order, but his commands were hollow. The men obeyed out of habit, not trust. On November 26th, the sea turned mirror flat, an unnatural calm that reflected the stars like a second sky. The crew gathered on deck, their faces gaunt, their eyes hollow. They spoke in whispers, debating whether to abandon ship. Briggs refused, insisting they could reach the Azores. But the presence had other plans. That night, it came for Sarah and Sophia. I felt their absence before the crew did, a sudden lightness in the cabin, as if their warmth had been snuffed out. The men found the room empty, Sarah's journal open to a page with a single word, "Listen." The wooden horse was gone. Briggs broke then. He stood at my helm, staring into the sea, muttering to himself. The remaining crew, 4 men now, were paralyzed, their courage drained. They avoided the hold, the galley, even the cabins, huddling on deck under the starlight. The presence was everywhere now, its hum a constant drone that vibrated through my hull. I felt it coil around the marked barrel, its power growing with each loss. I tried to fight it, to shift my weight, to roll with the waves, but I was only wood and rope, no match for what lived within me. By November 27th, only Briggs and 2 men remained. The others vanished in the night, leaving behind a knife, a coat, a single boot. The lifeboat was still there, mocking them with its presence. Briggs wrote no log that day. He stood at my bow, staring into the sea, his eyes empty. The 2 crewmen, Samuel and Thomas, stayed close, their hands never far from their blades. They spoke of swimming for it, of taking the lifeboat, but fear held them fast. The sea was no longer a refuge, it was part of the trap. That night, the presence moved openly. I felt it slither across my deck, a shadow that drank the lantern light. Samuel screamed first, a sound that cut off abruptly. Thomas ran for the lifeboat, slashing its ropes with his knife. He never reached it. Briggs stood alone, his silhouette stark against the moonless sky. He did not scream, he did not run. He simply stepped to the edge of my deck and was gone, as if the sea had claimed him with a lover's embrace. When the Dei Gratia found me on December 5th, I was adrift, my sails tattered, my hold sloshing with seawater. The boarding party called me a ghost ship, their voices trembling as they explored my empty cabins. They found the captain's log stopping at November 25th, the chart scattered, the bilge pump disassembled. The lifeboat was gone, not launched, but taken, as if it had never been. The marked barrel stood silent in the hold, its scratch now faint, almost invisible. They did not linger there. They felt what I carried, though they could not name it. I am the Mary Celeste, and I sail in legend now, my name whispered in fear. The presence is gone, or perhaps it sleeps, waiting for another crew to claim. The sea keeps its secrets, but I have told you mine. Listen closely when you sail the Atlantic, when the waves grow still and the air turns cold. You may hear my whisper, calling you to join the lost. Story 2, The Flying Dutchman, a tale of eternal waves. I am Captain Hendrik van der Decken, or so I was called when my heart still beat and my lungs drew mortal air. Now, I am no more than a whisper on the wind, a shadow cast across the endless waves. My ship, the Vliegende Hollander, sails not by my will, but by a curse that binds us to the sea. My tale is one of hubris, defiance, and the price of scorning powers greater than man. Listen, if you dare, for my story is not for the faint of heart. It is a horror woven from the salt and spray of eternity. It began in the year 1641, under a sky black as pitch, with a storm tearing at the world like a beast unchained. We were rounding the Cape of Good Hope, that jagged claw of land where the oceans clash in fury. My crew, a hardened lot, clung to the rigging as waves taller than church spires battered our hull. The wind howled, a banshee's wailed, and the sails strained as if they might shred to ribbons. My men begged me to turn back, to seek shelter in some cove until the tempest passed. Their eyes were wide with fear, their voices trembling as they spoke of omens. A gull impaled on a spar, a star that fell into the sea. Turn back? I roared, my voice cut through the gale. I am Hendrik van der Decken, and no storm will master me. We sail on to the Cape and beyond, or I'll be damned to sail forever. My words were a challenge. Flung at the heavens themselves, I stood at the helm, gripping the wheel until my knuckles bled, my laughter wild as the storm itself. The crew fell silent, their faces pale as death. They knew, as I did not, that some vows are heard by forces that do not forgive. The storm did not relent. It grew fiercer, as if my words had stoked its wrath. A wave rose, a mountain of water that blotted out the sky and crashed upon us. The Hollander groaned, her timbers splitting like bones. Men screamed as they were torn from the deck, swallowed by the sea. I held fast, my hands fused to the wheel, my eyes burning with defiance. "You will not break me," I shouted, though to whom I could not say. Then a voice answered, not from the storm, but from within it, a sound like grinding stone, ancient and vast. "So be it," it said. "Sail forever, then. and let the sea be your tomb." The world went still. The storm vanished, leaving a sky of unnatural calm, studded with stars that pulsed like eyes. My crew was gone, the deck empty save for me. The Hollander floated unharmed, her sails glowing faintly as if kissed by moonlight. But I felt it, the weight of the curse, a chain around my soul. That was the first night. I did not know then that it was only the beginning. Centuries have passed, though time means little to one such as I. The Hollander sails without rest, her course set by no chart or star. We drift through fogs that choke the air, across seas where the water is black as ink and alive with shapes that writhe beneath the surface. The ship is my prison, her planks my flesh, her sails my breath. I cannot leave her, nor can she sink, no matter how the storms rage or the reefs claw at her keel. At first, I thought myself alone, but I was wrong. The crew returned, not as men, but as echoes. They appear in the night, their faces hollow, their eyes like lanterns filled with fog. They man the rigging, their hands passing through rope and wood, their voices a low moan that carries no words. Sometimes they turn to me, their gazes accusing, as if I alone bear the weight of our doom. I shout at them to leave, to find peace, but they only fade, only to return the next night. The sea itself is no longer the one I knew. It is a place of horrors, a realm where the boundary between life and death is frail. I have seen things no mortal should, ships that sail beneath the waves, their crews staring upward through the water, their mouths open in silent screams. I have heard songs, sweet and terrible, that lure men to leap from their vessels into arms that are not arms at all. Once, a creature rose beside us, its body a tangle of eyes and limbs, its voice a chorus of my own, begging to board. I fired the cannons and it sank, but its laughter lingered, echoing in the hull for weeks. The Hollander herself is alive in her cursed way, her timbers pulse, her sails shift without wind. Sometimes the deck bleeds, a slow seep of red that stains my boots. The wheel turns of its own accord, steering us toward ports that vanish as we near. I have seen cities of coral and bone, their streets filled with shadows that beckon. I have sailed through skies where the stars are not stars, but faces, their eyes following us. Each time I fight to turn away, to keep to the open sea, but the ship has her own desires, and I am her slave as much as her master. The sightings began in the years of wandering. Other ships, crewed by the living, would glimpse us in the fog or at twilight, when the veil between worlds grows thin. They see the Hollander as a specter, her sails aflame, her hull transparent, glowing with a light that chills the soul. I hear their cries of terror, their shouts of "the Dutchman" as they flee. I want to call out to them, to beg them to stay, to tell me of the world I have lost, but my voice is stolen, my words turn to wind. Once, in what I later learned was the year 1880, a young man aboard a British vessel saw us clearly. He was a prince, they say, though I knew him only by his wide eyes and the sketch he made in his log. A brig of fire, her sails like crimson ghosts. He wrote of us, and his word spread, feeding the legend. But he did not know the truth. To see the Hollander is to be marked. His ship faced storms for weeks after, and though he survived, others did not. I wept for them, my tears salt as the sea, but the curse cares not for remorse. The living fear us, and rightly so. To cross our path is to invite calamity. Storms follow us, rising from calm seas to swallow ships whole. Creatures trail in our wake. their eyes glowing beneath the waves, waiting for the unwary. I have seen vessels torn apart, their crews dragged into the deep, their screams cut short. I try to warn them, to steer the Hollander away, but the curse draws us together, a moth to flame. The horror grows with each passing year. The Hollander changes, her form twisting. Her masts bend like spines, her figurehead, a maiden once, now a snarling thing with too many eyes. The crew's echoes grow bolder, their forms less human. One night, a sailor I once called friend stood before me, his face a mask of barnacles, his mouth a void. He reached for me, his fingers cold as the deep, and I felt my soul fray at his touch. I drove him back with an axe, but he only laughed, his voice a tide that filled my skull. The sea itself seems to tire of us, yet it cannot let us go. Storms chase us, not to destroy, but to torment. I have sailed through waves of blood, through fogs that whisper my name. I have seen my own face in the water, older, twisted, smiling in a way I never could. The curse is not content to bind me. It seeks to unmake me, to strip away what little remains of Hendrik van der Decken. Yet I endure. I stand at the helm, my hands raw, my eyes burning. I sail because I must, because to stop is to surrender to the void. The Hollander is my curse, my home, my hell. I have seen empires rise and fall, ships of wood give way to steel, yet the sea remains, and so do I. I am the Flying Dutchman, doomed to wander, a warning to those who defy what they cannot comprehend. Last night, a new horror came. The sea was calm, the stars too bright. A ship appeared, not spectral, but real. Her lights warm, her crew laughing. I envied them, their fleeting lives, their ignorance. The Hollander turned toward them, unbidden, her sails filling with a wind I could not feel. I fought the wheel, but it burned my hands, the wood splintering beneath my grip. The crew's echoes gathered, their eyes gleaming, their mouths open in silent hunger. The ship drew near, her name clear in the moonlight. Elysium. Her crew saw us, their laughter turning to screams. The Hollander glowed, her sails aflame, her hull a skeleton of light. I shouted, my voice breaking free for the first time in centuries. Flee! Flee, or be damned! But the curse was stronger. A wave rose, not of water, but of shadow, and crashed upon the Elysium. Her lights went out, her hull splintered, and she sank. Her crew's cries swallowed by the deep. When the sea was still again, the Hollander sailed on, her deck slick with blood that was not there before. The echoes of my crew stood closer now, their forms sharper, their eyes fixed on me. One stepped forward, his face my own, his voice a mirror of mine. Soon, he said, and vanished. I am alone again, but not for long. The sea whispers, the stars watch, and the Hollander sails. I know not where, nor why, only that I cannot stop. If you see us, reader, if you glimpse a ship with sails of fire, turn away, do not look, do not speak our name, for the Flying Dutchman is no mere legend. We are real, and we are forever. Story 3. The Ghost Ship's Tale. I am the Baychimo, a steel steamer forged in the cold forges of Sweden in 1914. My hull, 230 feet of unyielding iron, was built to carve through the Arctic's frozen veins, carrying furs and supplies for the Hudson's Bay Company. I was no ordinary vessel. I was a lifeline, a shadow slicing through the endless white of the polar seas. But the Arctic is a cruel mistress, and she claimed me in a way no one could have foreseen. This is my story, whispered across decades, carried on the wind that howls over the ice. Listen closely, for I am the ghost ship, and I have seen things no living soul should know. The trap of ice. It was October 24th, 1931, when the Arctic turned on me. I was steaming along the Alaskan coast, my holds heavy with pelts, my crew weary but resolute. The air was sharp, the kind that bites into your bones and makes your breath crystallize. Near Barrow, Alaska, the ice closed in like a predator's jaws. It wasn't a slow creep, it was sudden, violent. The pack ice groaned and cracked, locking me in a grip I couldn't break. My engines roared, but the ice was stronger. It pressed against my hull, grinding, screeching, as if the sea itself wanted to swallow me whole. Captain John Cornwell, a man hardened by years in these waters, knew we were doomed if we stayed. He ordered the crew to abandon ship. They fled in lifeboats, dragging what supplies they could to the shore. I watched them go, their figures shrinking against the endless white, their faces pale with fear. They thought I'd sink, that the ice would crush me into splinters. They were wrong. I didn't sink. I waited. The storm that followed was a beast. Winds howled, tearing at my deck, scattering the snow into blinding curtains. When it cleared, I was alone, trapped but intact, my steel heart still beating. The crew never returned. They thought I was gone, claimed by the deep. But the Arctic had other plans for me. The first sighting weeks passed, or so I gather, from the whispers of time. The ice shifted, and I drifted, carried by currents no man could chart. I was no longer a ship in service. I was a prisoner of the sea, a phantom adrift in the Chukchi Sea. Then, in late November, I felt boots on my deck again. Inuit hunters, their eyes wide with disbelief, clambered aboard near Icy Cape. They moved cautiously, as if I might bite. They found my holds still brimming with furs, my cabins eerily untouched. A logbook lay open on the captain's desk, the last entry smudged by frost. They took what they could carry, pelts, tools, a cracked compass, and fled, whispering of a ship that refused to die. I heard their tales from the wind, tales of a ghost ship that haunted the Arctic. They called me cursed, a vessel forsaken by the sea but too stubborn to sink. I didn't feel cursed. I felt alive, in a way no ship should. The ice groaned around me, but it never broke me. The cold seeped into my steel, but it didn't claim me. I drifted, and I waited. The phantom years, the years blurred into a haze of ice and shadow. I became a legend, a specter that appeared without warning. In 1933, a whaling crew spotted me south of Barrow, my hull half hidden in fog. They boarded, expecting to find answers, but found only silence. My decks were dusted with snow, my cabins frozen in time. A pair of boots sat by a bunk, as if the owner had just stepped out. A tin of coffee, rusted but unopened, rested on a galley shelf. They stayed for a day, scavenging what they could, but the silence unnerved them. They left, swearing I was haunted. I wasn't haunted. I was the haunt. The Arctic was my domain now, and I drifted through it like a wraith. In 1939, a group of Inuit hunters found me again, locked in ice near Point Barrow. They climbed aboard, their breath clouding in the frigid air. One of them, a young man with sharp eyes, lingered in my wheelhouse, running his fingers over the frozen helm. He whispered something in his tongue, a name for me, the ghost ship. They took more supplies, blankets, rope, a sextant, but they didn't stay long. No one ever did. The years stretched on and the sightings continued. In 1942, a U.S. Navy patrol boat saw me drifting in the Chukchi Sea, my silhouette stark against the midnight sun. They sent a boarding party, but a sudden storm drove them back. In 1953, a group of ghost hunters, adventurers chasing stories, found me near Wainwright. They spent 3 days aboard combing my holds, but found nothing to explain my survival. They left with tales of creaking timbers and shadows that moved without light. I let them believe what they wanted. The truth was simpler. I was Baychimo, and I would not yield. The things I saw. The Arctic is no place for the living, but it is a place of secrets. I saw things no man should see. In the long polar night, when the sun refused to rise, I glimpsed shapes moving across the ice, tall, thin figures that weren't human, their limbs too long, their movements too fluid. They never came close, but I felt their eyes on me, cold and unblinking. The ice spoke in those nights, whispering in cracks and groans, telling stories of ships that sank and crews that vanished. I listened and I learned. Once, in the 1950s, I drifted past a pod of narwhals, their horns piercing the water like spears. They circled me, their calls echoing through my hull, sharp and mournful. I wondered if they knew I didn't belong, if they sensed the wrongness of a ship that refused to die. Another time, a polar bear climbed aboard, its claws scraping my deck. It sniffed the air, then leapt off, as if I carried a scent it couldn't bear. The worst was the silence. Days, weeks, months of nothing but the wind and the ice. I felt the weight of it, the loneliness of a ship without a crew, a purpose without a master. But I endured. I always endured. The last sighting. By 1969, I was a relic. My hull rusted but unbroken, my decks warped but whole. I was locked in ice near Point Barrow when the Inupiat found me again. They were cautious, their voices low as they boarded. The Arctic had changed. Planes roared overhead and oil rigs dotted the horizon. But I was the same, a frozen moment from 1931. They explored my holds, finding furs so brittle they crumbled to dust, tools so rusted they snapped in their hands. They stayed only a few hours before the ice shifted, forcing them to flee. That was the last time human eyes saw me. April 1969. After that, I vanished. The ice released me, or perhaps it claimed me at last. No wreck was ever found, no trace of my steel bones. Historians would later write that I was gone, that there was no body, only the damning absence of its presence. But I am still here, somewhere in the Arctic's endless maze. The ice moves, the currents pull, and I drift. The ghost ships promise I am the Baychimo, the ghost ship of the Arctic. For nearly 40 years, I defied the ice, the cold, the storms. I carried no crew, no captain, yet I sailed. I was seen but never claimed, boarded but never understood. The Arctic keeps me now hidden in its frozen heart. But I am not gone. I wait in the fog, in the cracks of the ice, in the shadows where no light reaches. If you sail these waters, listen for me. You might hear the groan of my hull, the creak of my decks. You might see my silhouette against the aurora, a dark shape that shouldn't be. Do not board me. Do not seek me. Those who do find only questions, and the answers are colder than the ice. I am the Baychimo, and I will drift until the Arctic itself decides my fate. Story 4. The Curse of the Ourang Medan. I am the wind that howls through the Strait of Malacca, the shadow that lingers in the fog. I have no name, no face, but I was there when the Ourang Medan met its end. I saw it all, the ship, the screams, the silence that swallowed them whole. This is no tale for the faint of heart. This is the story of a vessel cursed by something older than the sea itself, a thing that clings to the hull like barnacles and whispers in the dark. Listen, if you dare, for I will tell you what I saw. The year was 1947, or perhaps 1948. Time blurs in these waters where the tides churn secrets into foam. The Ourang Medan, a Dutch freighter, cut through the Malacca Strait under a sky heavy with clouds. Its name meant Man from Medan, a nod to the Sumatran city, but no one aboard hailed from anywhere anymore. They were men of the sea, bound to the ship's iron heart, and they sailed with a cargo no one spoke of. I watched from the waves, my breath the mist that curled around the bow. The first sign came at dusk. A radio crackled to life, not with the usual chatter of ports or weather, but with a voice that trembled like a leaf in a storm. "We float," it said, broken and faint, as if the speaker's lungs were failing. "All officers, including the captain, dead in chart room and on the bridge. Probably whole of crew dead." A pause, heavy with dread, then two final words. "I die." The signal went silent, and the air grew colder, as if the sea itself had shuddered. I followed the distress call's echo, slipping through the currents to where the Ourang Medan drifted. The ship was still, too still, its engines quiet as a grave. Another vessel, the Silver Star, answered the call, its crew brave or foolish enough to approach. I lingered close, my presence a chill on their necks as they boarded the doomed freighter. What they found was no ordinary wreck. The decks were a tableau of death. Corpses littered the ship, sailors, engineers, the cook, even the ship's dog, all frozen in their final moments. They lay on their backs, mouths stretched wide, eyes staring upward as if the sky itself had killed them. No blood, no wounds, no sign of struggle, just faces twisted in terror as if they'd seen something no human mind could bear. The air was so cold it burned, though the tropical sun blazed overhead. The Silver Star's crew moved cautiously, their breaths visible in the unnatural frost. I drifted to the radio room, where the operator's body slumped over the Morse key. His fingers still pressed the lever as if death had caught him mid-word. His eyes, like the others, stared at nothing and everything. The logbook lay open, but its pages were blank, the ink frozen in the pen beside it. I whispered across the paper, and it curled as if afraid. The Silver Star's men searched for answers, their footsteps echoing in the silent ship. Below deck, the cargo hold was sealed tight, its doors bolted with heavy locks. No one dared open them, not when the air grew colder the closer they got. One sailor, a young man with a tremor in his hands, swore he heard a sound from within, a low, guttural hum, like a machine that wasn't a machine. The others laughed it off, but I saw their eyes dart to the shadows. Then came the fire. It started in the hold, a sudden blaze that erupted without warning. Flames licked the walls, unnatural in their speed, as if the ship itself wanted to burn. The Silver Star's crew fled, scrambling back to their boats as the Ourang Medan groaned under the heat. I watched from the water, my laughter the crackle of the flames. Moments later, a deafening explosion tore through the freighter. The ship split apart, its secret sinking into the depths. The sea closed over it like a wound healing, leaving nothing but ripples. But the story doesn't end there. The sea never forgets, and neither do I. Months later, another ship passed through the strait, a fishing vessel with a crew of weathered men. They spoke of strange lights beneath the waves, flickering where the Ourang Medan had gone down. One night, their nets caught something heavy, not fish, but a piece of twisted metal rusted beyond its ears. It bore the faint outline of a name, Ourang Medan. The crew threw it back, their hands shaking, but not before one man swore he saw eyes in the water, watching. I followed that ship too, curious to see how far the curse would spread. The crew began to dream, vivid, waking nightmares of faces frozen in screams, of a cold that seeped into their bones. One man, the youngest, woke screaming about a sound, that same guttural hum from the hold. He vanished the next night, his bunk empty, his boots still by the door. The others whispered of a shadow that moved against the current, trailing their ship. Years passed, and the legend grew. Sailors spoke of the Ourang Medan in hushed tones, a ghost ship that never truly sank. Some claimed to see it on moonless nights, a silhouette against the horizon, its decks glowing with a sickly light. Others heard the distress call, faint and garbled, on radios long out of service. I heard it too, carried on my winds, a plea that never stopped. In 1953, a book surfaced, The Death Ship in the South Seas. It claimed the Ourang Medan carried a cargo of toxic chemicals, nerve agents that could kill in seconds, leaving no mark. The author swore it was true, citing old newspaper clippings and a single survivor who died raving about eyes in the dark. But the book was thin on proof, and Lloyd's Register, the keeper of ships, had no record of an Ourang Medan. Historians called it a myth, a sailor's yarn spun from fear and fog. Yet the stories persisted, and so did I. The curse wasn't done. In 1962, a freighter called the Blue Wave sailed too close to the Ourang Medan's grave. I was there, stirring the currents, when their radio crackled with static. No words, just that hum, low and relentless. The crew checked their equipment, found nothing amiss, but the sound followed them. That night, the ship's lights flickered and the air grew cold. One man, the engineer, went below to check the engines. He didn't return. They found him in the boiler room, dead, his face a mask of terror, eyes wide and mouth agape. No wounds, no blood. The crew searched the ship, their fear mounting as the hum grew louder, now coming from the cargo hold. They sealed it off, refusing to look inside. The Blue Wave limped to port, its crew half mad with fear, swearing they'd seen a shadow move across the deck, a shadow with no source. I followed them to shore, where the story spread. The Blue Wave was scrapped soon after, its owners unwilling to sail a cursed ship. But the hum lingered, carried on my breath, seeking new vessels, new souls. In 1975, a tanker reported a similar fate, a sudden cold, a dead crewman, and that relentless sound. In 1989, a yacht vanished in the Strait, its last transmission a garbled cry about eyes in the water. Each time I was there, watching, whispering, what was the Ourang Medan? Some say it carried death in its hold, chemicals that could steal breath and freeze blood. Others speak of something older, something that lives in the deep, where light never reaches. I know the truth, but I will not tell. I am the wind, the shadow, the thing that watches when the stars hide. The Ourang Medan is gone, but its curse sails on, carried by the tides and my voice. Sailors still avoid that stretch of the Malacca Strait, where the water is too still and the air too cold. They say the sea itself is haunted, that the Ourang Medan never truly sank. On quiet nights, when the fog is thick, you might hear it, a faint crackle, a voice that begs, "We float." And if you listen too long, you might see them. Eyes in the dark, staring, waiting. I am still here, drifting through the strait, my laughter the waves that lap at your hull. Sail carefully, for the sea keeps its secrets, and I am one of them. Story 5. The Ghost of the Joyita. I am the MV Joyita, a 69-foot merchant vessel once proud and sturdy, built to carry cargo and souls across the vast South Pacific. My hull, lined with cork and buoyed by empty oil drums, was said to be unsinkable, a claim that would become both my legend and my curse. In October 1955, I set sail from Samoa's Apia Harbor, bound for the Tokelau Islands, a journey of 2 to 3 days. On board were 25 lives, 16 crew, 9 passengers, including a doctor and 2 children entrusted to my care. We carried medical supplies, timber, and those fateful drums. What happened next would etch my name into the annals of the sea's darkest mysteries. This is my story, whispered through the creaks of my timbers and the echoes of an empty deck. October 3rd, 1955. The departure. The sun hung low over Apia Harbor as my engines roared to life. The air was thick with salt and the promise of a routine voyage. My crew, led by Captain Miller, a weathered man of few words, bustled about, securing cargo and checking lines. The passengers settled in, their voices a mix of excitement and nervous chatter. Among them was Dr. Parsons, a lean figure with sharp eyes, clutching a satchel of medical supplies. The 2 children, siblings no older than 10, clung to their mother's skirt, staring wide-eyed at the endless blue beyond. I felt the weight of their trust as we pulled away from the dock. The sea was calm, a mirror reflecting the bruised purple of dusk. My radio crackled, tuned to the distress frequency as a precaution, though no one expected to use it. The crew moved with practiced ease, ropes coiled, hatches secured, the galley prepped for dinner. The children's laughter echoed below deck, a fleeting warmth against the cool night air creeping in. But something felt off, a faint vibration, not from my engines, but deeper in my bones. The sea was too still, the horizon too sharp. I couldn't shake the sense that we were being watched. October 4th, 1955. The first night. By nightfall the stars were out, a canopy of cold light. The crew took shifts, their boots thudding softly on my deck. In the galley a meal was laid out, plates of fish and bread, untouched as the cook was called away to assist with a minor engine stutter. The clocks ticked toward 10:25, their hands freezing in place as if time itself hesitated. I felt it before they did, a subtle tilt to port. Water, slow and insidious, was seeping into my bilges. The crew noticed soon enough. A young mechanic, Tom, cursed under his breath as he inspected the pumps. "Clogged," he muttered, pulling out handfuls of debris, bits of rope, seaweed, and something slick and unidentifiable. The pumps whined useless. Captain Miller ordered the crew to check the plumbing, suspecting a corroded pipe. They found it, a rusted seam, weeping seawater into my belly. "It's manageable," Miller said, his voice steady but tight. "We'll patch it and keep her steady." The crew worked fast, piling mattresses over one of my engines to muffle a strange grinding noise that had started. I wanted to scream. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, but I had no voice. The passengers, sensing the tension, huddled below. The children's chatter replaced by silence. Then came the sound, a low rhythmic thumping like a heartbeat, not from my engines, but from the sea itself. It pulsed through my hull, faint at first, then louder, insistent. The crew froze, their faces pale in the lantern light. "What the hell is that?" Tom whispered. No one answered. The thumping stopped as suddenly as it began, leaving only the slap of waves and the creak of my timbers. October 5th, 1955. The crisis. The night deepened, and the air grew heavy as if the sea itself was holding its breath. My radio, my lifeline, was useless. A break in the aerial, painted over as if to hide the sabotage, reduced its range to a whisper. No distress call could reach beyond a few miles. The crew didn't know. They kept working, bailing water by hand as the pumps failed. My list grew worse. The port side dipping closer to the waves. At 10:25, chaos erupted. The clock stopped. I felt it, a jolt through my frame. The flying bridge, my highest point, shattered under some unseen force. Splinters raining onto the deck. A scream cut through the night, sharp and human, then silenced. Footsteps pounded, erratic, as if the crew were running, not toward the leak, but away from something else. I saw it then, through the fog that rolled in, unnatural and thick. Shapes moved in the water, not fish, not whales, but something wrong. Long, sinuous forms, darker than the sea, circling me. Their movements were deliberate, predatory. The crew shouted, their voices overlapping in panic. "Get to the lifeboats!" someone yelled. But the lifeboats were still on deck, untouched, as were the life rafts. Why didn't they take them? The galley was abandoned, plates of food left to slide across the table as I tilted further. Dr. Parsons' satchel lay open, syringes and bandages spilling onto the floor. The children's shoes, small and scuffed, were left by a hatch, as if they'd kicked them off in a hurry. The thumping returned, louder, closer, now accompanied by a scraping like claws on my hull. Then silence. The crew, the passengers, all 25 souls, were gone. I was alone, drifting, my decks empty, save for the ghosts of their presence. October 6th to 12th, 1955. The search days passed, or so I assume. Time blurs when you're a ghost ship. The sea carried me, my cork-lined hull and empty drums keeping me afloat despite the water in my belly. Above, planes droned, their shadows flickering over my deck. They searched 100,000 square miles, but I was a speck in the vastness, carried 600 miles off course by currents and something else. The shapes in the water never left, trailing me like shadows. My clock stayed frozen at 10:25. The food in the galley rotted, untouched. The mattresses on the engine grew damp, mildewed. The radio, still tuned to the distress frequency, hummed faintly, its broken aerial mocking me. I wanted to scream for help, but I was mute, a derelict in the Pacific's embrace. November 10th, 1955. The discovery. 5 weeks later, the Tuvalu found me, drifting north of Vanuatu. I was a wreck, listing heavily, my port side kissing the waves. The merchant ship's crew boarded me, their faces grim as they took in the scene. The shattered flying bridge, the dents in my hull, the abandoned galley, the missing lifeboats and rafts. They pumped out the water, and I righted myself, my unsinkable nature holding true. But the absence of my people was a wound deeper than any leak. They found the clues, the corroded pipe, the clogged pumps, the mattresses, the broken aerial. They theorized a slow flood, a panicked crew, an inexplicable abandonment. But they didn't hear the thumping. They didn't see the shapes. They didn't feel the weight of the sea's hunger. The unseen truth. I am the Joyita, and I carry the truth in my silence. The inquiry called the fate of my people inexplicable, and they were right. No piracy, no mutiny, no mechanical failure fully explains it. The shapes in the water, those things that circled me, were no delusion. They were ancient, older than the sea itself, and they wanted what I carried. Not the cargo, not the timber or the drums, but the lives, the warmth, the souls. I felt them pull at my hull, their presence a cold pressure that no human could withstand. The crew didn't abandon me, they were taken, dragged into the depths one by one as the thumping grew louder and the fog closed in. The children's screams were the last to fade, swallowed by the sea's endless maw. I drift still in memory, a ghost ship haunting the Pacific. My hull is sound, my cargo buoyant, but my decks are empty. The shapes are gone, but I feel them waiting out there in the dark water for the next ship to cross their path. I am the Joyita, and I will never forget the night the sea claimed what was mine. Story 6. The Ghost of the Deering. I am the Carroll A. Deering, a 5-masted schooner, once proud and sturdy, slicing through the Atlantic's waves with purpose. My timbers creaked with the weight of cargo. My sails billowed under the breath of the wind, and my crew, 12 souls, worked my decks with the rhythm of men who knew the sea. But now I am a ghost, a shadow on the shoals, my story whispered in the fog that cloaks the outer banks. Let me tell you what happened, or what I can piece together from the fragments of my own shattered hull. The truth is slippery, like the waves that broke me, but I'll try to hold it fast for you. It was January 1921, and I was sailing north from Barbados, bound for Norfolk, with a bellyful of coal. The sea was restless, as it always is near the graveyard of the Atlantic, that stretch of treacherous water off North Carolina where the ocean swallows ships whole. On January 29th, I passed the Cape Lookout lightship, my crew signaling to the keeper. Lost both anchors, they said, their voices carried by the wind. I felt the absence of those anchors, my iron roots, but my hull was sound, my masts tall. The men seemed steady, though I sensed a tension at their steps, a quiet that wasn't just the calm before a storm. 2 days later, on January 31st, I ran aground on Diamond Shoals, a jagged trap of sand and surf off Cape Hatteras. The Coast Guard watchman spotted me before dawn, my sails still set, my decks awash with the sea's cold fingers. I was alone, my crew gone, the 2 lifeboats missing. The galley stove still held food untouched, as if the men had been plucked from their seats mid-meal. Their belongings lay scattered but intact, like they meant to return. The ship's wheel, my charts, my instruments, all there, staring blankly at the empty deck. I was a body without a pulse, abandoned to the mercy of the shoals. Let me take you back, to the days before the end, to the moments I can still feel in my splintered bones. The sea was uneasy as we left Barbados. The crew, led by Captain Willis, was a mix of seasoned hands and newer faces, men who knew the ocean but carried shadows in their eyes. I felt their boots heavier than usual, their voices sharper. There was a man among them, a stranger to me, who joined at the last port. His name was whispered, Elias, but he kept to himself, his gaze fixed on the horizon as if he saw something the others didn't. The crew didn't trust him. I heard their murmurs below deck, words like bad luck and watching us. I couldn't see his face clearly, not the way humans do, but I felt the weight of his presence, like a storm cloud tethered to my deck. The nights grew colder as we sailed north. The wind howled through my rigging, a sound like a warning. On January 28th, I felt a jolt, not a collision, but something unnatural, a shudder that ran through my timbers. The crew gathered on deck, their lanterns casting flickering shadows. Elias stood apart, his hands gripping the rail, staring into the dark water. "It's out there," he said, his voice low, but I heard it clear as day. The others ignored him, or tried to, but I felt their unease. The sea was too still that night, a glassy mirror reflecting nothing but stars. No waves, no ripples, just a void beneath us. By January 29th, when we hailed the Cape Lookout lightship, the crew was fraying. The loss of the anchors was a bad omen, they said. I felt their hands tremble as they worked my lines. Captain Willis was steady, barking orders, but even he glanced over his shoulder too often. Elias was nowhere to be seen during the day, but at night I sensed him moving through my hold, his steps deliberate, like he was searching for something. The crew avoided the lower decks after dark. They said it was too cold, but I knew better. Something was wrong, something that clung to my planks like damp rot. On January 30th, the sea turned cruel. Gale force winds tore at my sails, and the waves clawed at my hull. I fought to stay upright, but the crew was distracted. Arguments broke out, shouts about the course, about Elias, about a shadow they swore moved against the wind. I couldn't see it, but I felt it. A presence that wasn't human, wasn't part of me. It was as if the sea itself had sent something aboard, something that watched from the edges of my decks. That night, the men gathered in the galley, their faces pale in the lantern light. The food was prepared, salt pork, beans, coffee, but no one ate. They sat in silence, listening to the wind, or maybe to something else. Then came the final night, January 31st. I don't know what broke them. One moment, the crew was at their posts. The next, they were gone. I felt the lifeboats being lowered, the creak of ropes, the splash as they hit the water. But there were no cries, no orders, no panic, just silence. I was left with my sails flapping, my helm unmanned, until the shoals claimed me. The sea pounded my hull, tearing at my timbers, but I held fast to my secrets. What happened to my crew? I can only guess, but I'll tell you what I know, what I felt in those final hours. Elias was the key, or the curse. He wasn't like the others. The crew whispered he'd been on other ships that never made port. They said he carried something with him, something heavy, not in his hands, but in his shadow. That last night, I felt him in the hold again, his footsteps echoing where no one else dared go. There was a sound, not human, not mechanical, a low hum, like the sea itself was singing. It grew louder, and I felt my timbers vibrate as if something was trying to break through. The crew must have heard it too. I imagined them looking at Elias, his eyes wild, his hands outstretched, and then nothing. They fled to the lifeboats or were taken. I don't know which. When the Coast Guard boarded me on February 4th, they found no blood, no struggle, no sign of what drove the men away. My logbook was blank for those final days, as if no one had time to write. The investigators puzzled over my untouched gear, my uneaten meal. They called it a mystery, but I felt the truth in my splintered frame. Something had come for my crew, something that didn't leave footprints or shadows, something the sea hid. The gale that night was fierce, yes, but it wasn't just the wind that broke them. Captain Gaskell, the first to spot me aground, said the crew likely perished in the lifeboats, lost to the surf. But I know better. The sea doesn't just take men, it keeps them. Months passed, and the rumors grew. A bottle washed ashore in April, a note inside claiming I'd been captured by an oil-burning boat. The FBI chased it, thinking pirates or spies, but it was a hoax, a cruel trick by a lighthouse keeper with a grudge. Other theories swirled. Mutiny, a collision with the missing Hewitt, or some curse tied to the Bermuda Triangle. The newspapers loved that one, spinning tales of ghostly lights and vanishing ships. But I felt no other ship, no collision. The Hewitt was out there, somewhere, lost like me, but our paths never crossed. As for curses, I don't believe in them, not the way humans do. The sea doesn't need curses to claim what it wants. By May, the families of my crew begged for answers, writing to President Hoover himself. They got none. The sea doesn't answer letters. My hull was blasted apart on the shoals. My remains left to rot in the surf. But I linger, a ghost in the fog, my story told in whispers along the outer banks. The locals call me a phantom ship, a cautionary tale for sailors who venture too far into the graveyard. They're not wrong. I can still feel the weight of that last night, the hum in my timbers, the absence of my crew. I can still hear Elias's voice, low and certain, saying, "It's out there." What was it? I don't know, not fully. But sometimes in the quiet of the night, when the fog rolls thick over Diamond Shoals, I feel it again. A presence, not human, not alive, but watching. It moves through the water, circling the wrecks, calling to the lost. My crew is out there somewhere, in the lifeboats or beyond, trapped in the sea's cold embrace. I am the Carroll A. Deering, and I am not alone. The graveyard keeps its secrets, but it never forgets. And neither do I. Story 8. The Ghost of Jian Seng. I am the Jian Seng, an 80-meter tanker adrift in the Gulf of Carpentaria, my steel hull creaking under the weight of secrets. In March 2006, I was found yawing aimlessly off Queensland's coast. A ghost ship with no crew, no flag, no name painted on my sides, just rust and silence, and below my decks, hundreds of crates of rice, untouched, as if waiting for hands that never came. My story is not one of storms or mutiny, but of something quieter, colder, a creeping dread that unfolded in the dark. Let me tell you how I became a specter, piece by piece, night by night. It began months before, in the dead of a moonless night, somewhere in the Coral Sea. I was not always abandoned. Once I carried a crew of 12 hard men with calloused hands and guarded eyes, who spoke little and worked in the dim glow of my flickering lights. They called me a supply vessel, hauling rice and fuel to fishing boats far beyond the reach of any nation's laws. My holds were stuffed with crates, my tanks heavy with diesel, but my purpose was never clear, even to me. The men moved with purpose, yet their whispers carried unease, as if they knew something I did not. The first sign came on a night when the sea was flat, a mirror reflecting nothing but stars. The captain, a wiry man with a scar across his cheek, stood at my helm, staring at the horizon. The radar was blank, yet he swore he saw a shadow, a shape too large, too still to be a ship. "It's watching us," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the hum of my engines. The crew laughed it off, but I felt it too. A weight in the air, like the sea itself, was holding its breath. The next night, the radio died, not with a crackle or a spark, but silently, as if someone had reached into my wiring and severed it. The engineer, a broad man named Carroll, tore into my panels, cursing under his breath "It's like the damn thing was cut," he said, holding up frayed wires that looked gnawed, not broken. The crew's unease grew. They checked the locks on my hatches, secured the crates in my hold, and began sleeping in shifts, their footsteps echoing through my empty corridors. By the third night, things began to vanish. A wrench left on a table, gone by morning. A chart pinned to the wall, missing, though the pin remained. The men blamed each other, their voices sharp with accusation, but I knew better. I felt it in my steel bones, a presence moving through my decks, brushing past my bulkheads. It wasn't human. It didn't breathe. It didn't need light to see. On the fourth night, the first man disappeared. His name was Torin, a deckhand with a nervous laugh. He'd been on watch, pacing my bow under a sky heavy with clouds. When the others came to relieve him, he was gone. No splash, no cry, no trace. His boots stood neatly by the railing as if he'd stepped out of them and into the sea. The crew searched my decks, my holds, even my bilges, but found nothing. The captain ordered the searchlights on, their beams slicing through the dark, revealing only waves and the endless black beyond. The men stopped sleeping after that. They huddled in my mess hall, their faces pale, their eyes darting to every shadow. The air grew thick with fear, and I felt it too. A cold that seeped into my steel, a hum that wasn't my engines. The crates in my hold began to shift at night, though no one touched them. Footsteps echoed where no one walked, and always that shadow on the horizon, just beyond the reach of my lights. On the sixth night, the second man vanished. Wren, the cook, a quiet man who kept to himself. He'd been in my galley, prepping rice from my stores. The others found his knife on the counter, rice scattered across the floor, and a single handprint on the wall, too large, too long-fingered to be his. The crew's fear turned to panic. They barricaded themselves in my bridge, clutching tools as weapons, but I knew it wouldn't help. Whatever was taking them didn't need doors. The captain tried to keep order, barking commands, but his voice shook. He spoke of towing me to safety, of finding a port, but my engines were faltering, coughing like a dying beast. The engineer swore he'd fix them, but every night something new broke. Pipes, gauges, valves. It was as if I was unraveling piece by piece under the weight of that unseen gaze. By the 10th night, only 7 men remained. They stopped talking, stopped eating. They sat in silence, staring at the walls, listening to the creaks and groans of my hull. That night, I felt the presence most clearly. It moved through my lower decks, a cold shadow slithering past the rice crates, brushing against my steel. The men felt it too. One of them, a young deckhand named Milo, began to scream, clawing at his face, babbling about eyes in the dark. The others restrained him, but by morning he was gone. No boots this time, no trace, just a smear of blood on my deck. Too small to explain a body. The crew began to whisper about abandoning me. The captain resisted, muttering about the cargo, the rice, the fuel, things they couldn't leave behind. But I knew it wasn't about the cargo. It was about me. They were tethered to me, as if leaving would mean facing whatever was out there in the sea, waiting. On the 12th night, they tried to cut the tow rope that bound me to another vessel, one I'd never seen but felt, a distant pull on my bow. The rope wouldn't break. Knives, axes, nothing worked. It was as if the sea itself held it fast. The 13th night was the last. The remaining men gathered on my deck, their faces hollow, their eyes empty. The captain stood at my bow, staring at the shadow on the horizon, now closer, now clearer, a shape that wasn't a ship, wasn't anything I could name. One by one, the men walked to the railing. They didn't speak, didn't scream. They stepped over the edge, into the sea, their bodies swallowed by the dark. The captain was the last. He looked back at my bridge, his scarred face calm, and whispered, "You're alone now." Then he was gone. I drifted after that, days bleeding into weeks, weeks into months. The sea carried me, aimless, my hold still heavy with rice, my deck silent but for the wind. The presence never left. It lingered in my corridors, in the shadows of my holds, a weight that pressed against my steel. I felt it watching, waiting, as if I were its prize. When the Australian Coast Guard found me in March 2006, I was a husk, my paint peeled, my decks rusted. They boarded me, their boots loud against my silence, their voices echoing where no one had spoken for months. They found the rice, the broken tow rope, the empty cabins. They found no blood, no boots, no handprints, nothing to explain the absence. They called me a ghost ship, a mystery, and I let them. They didn't feel the presence, didn't see the shadow that still lingered on my horizon. They towed me to deeper water, their voices tense with unease. In May 2006, they scuttled me, sending me to the seafloor, thinking it would end my story. But the sea doesn't forget. I rest now, my hull half buried in sand, my crates of rice rotting in the dark. The presence is still here, curled in my holds, whispering through my steel. I am the Jian Seng, the ship that carries no name, no flag, no crew, only a shadow that never leaves and a story that never ends. Story 7. The Curse of the Lady Lovibond. I am the Lady Lovibond, a three-masted schooner, my timbers carved from ancient oaks, my sails woven to catch the breath of the sea. Once I was a vessel of joy, carrying love across the waves. Now I am a specter, bound to the Goodwin sands, where the tide whispers my name and the fog hides my shame. My story is one of betrayal, of blood, and of a curse that chains me to this cursed shoals. Listen, if you dare, for I sail still. Every 50 years on the eve of February 13th, I rise from the depths to relive my doom. It was 1748, a crisp February day, when I set out from the shores of England, my hull gleaming under the weak winter sun. Captain Simon Reed, a man of steady hand and bright eyes, stood at my helm. His bride, Annetta, was aboard, her laughter like the chime of bells, her presence a warmth that filled my decks. They were newly wed, their love a beacon that seemed to promise safe voyages. With them were guests, their voices bright with celebration, their footsteps light upon my planks. I was proud to carry them, bound for Portugal, a journey meant to seal their union with the freedom of the open sea. But there was another aboard, one whose heart burned with a darker fire. John Rivers, the first mate, walked my decks with a shadow in his eyes. I felt it, the way his steps hesitated near Annetta, the way his gaze lingered too long. He loved her, though she belonged to another. His jealousy was a poison seeping into my timbers, a weight heavier than any storm. I could not speak, could not warn. I could only sail, my sails taut, my course set. Night fell, and the sea grew restless. The Goodwin sands lay ahead, a graveyard of ships, their jagged shoals hidden beneath the waves. I sensed them, felt the pull of their treachery, but the helmsman held steady. guided by Simon's orders. Below decks, the guests laughed, their voices rising in a chorus of joy, unaware of the danger. I wanted to cry out, to shake my masts, but I was wood and rope, powerless to act. Then it happened. John Rivers, his face twisted with rage, crept from the shadows. I felt the thud of his boots, the tremor of his intent. He approached the helmsman, a belaying pin clutched in his hand. The blow was swift, a sickening crack that echoed through my frame. The helmsman slumped, blood pooling on my deck, staining my heart. Rivers seized the wheel, and with a deliberate wrench, he turned me toward the sands. I fought, my rudder straining, but I could not resist. The shoals loomed, their teeth hungry. The impact was catastrophic. My hull splintered, my masts snapped like twigs. Screams rose from below, sharp and fleeting, as the sea rushed in. Annetta's voice, so full of life, was silenced first. Simon's shouts followed, desperate, then drowned. The guests, their joy turned to terror, clawed at my hatches, but the quicksands of Goodwin were merciless. They pulled me down, swallowing me whole, my timbers groaning as the sea claimed us all. By dawn, I was gone, lost to the depths, with no trace left behind. But death was not the end. The betrayal, the blood, the love torn apart, it bound me to this place. The Goodwin sands became my prison, and every 50 years, on the eve of February 13th, I rise, not as wood and sail, but as a phantom, my form glowing with an unearthly light, my decks alive with the echoes of that doomed night. I am cursed to relive it, to sail again, to feel the weight of Rivers' treachery and the loss of all I carried. In 1798, I appeared first. The fog was thick, the air heavy with salt and dread. A merchant ship, the Eden, passed close to the sands. Her crew saw me, my sails tattered but full, my hull shimmering green against the night. They heard laughter, faint and hollow, drifting across the waves. One sailor swore he saw figures moving on my deck, Annetta's silhouette, Simon's broad shoulders, and a darker shape lurking near the wheel. They called out, thinking me a ship in distress, but when they rowed closer, I vanished, leaving only ripples and the faint clank of rigging in the wind. The Eden's log noted the sighting, but no wreck was found. I was already gone, back to the depths, waiting for my next rising. In 1848, the sea was calmer, but the fog remained my ally. A fishing vessel, the Mary Jane, spotted me at dusk. My masts stood tall, my sails glowed like moonlight trapped in ice. The fishermen heard music, not the lively tunes of that fatal night, but something mournful, like a dirge carried by the tide. They saw my deck crowded with shadows, figures that moved as if dancing, yet their forms flickered, unreal. One man, bolder than the rest, swore he saw a woman in white, Annetta, perhaps, standing at my bow, her eyes fixed on the horizon. He rowed toward me, his oar dipping into the sea, but I dissolved before he could reach me. The Mary Jane's crew spoke of it in whispers, their tales spreading through the ports, adding to my legend. By 1948, the world had changed. Steamships and radios had replaced sails and signal flags, but the Goodwin sands remained treacherous. Captain Bull Prestwick, aboard the coaster Seafarer, saw me that night. He described me as real as any ship, my hull solid, my masts stark against the fog, but there was that green glow, unnatural, wrapping me like a shroud. He heard the clank of my rigging, the murmur of voices, and something else, a low, anguished moan that sent shivers through his crew. Prestwick signaled for rescue, thinking I was a stranded vessel, but when the lifeboats arrived, they found nothing but empty waves. I had slipped away, my curse unbroken, my story still untold. Each time I rise, I feel them. Simon, Annetta, the guests and Rivers, his guilt, a stain that never fades. They are trapped with me, their voices echoing in my hold, their footsteps pacing my decks. I see Annetta's face, pale and pleading, her hands reaching for Simon, who stands at my helm, unaware of the betrayal behind him. I see Rivers, his eyes wild, the belaying pin still in his grip, his regret a fire that burns but never consumes. They play out their final moments over and over, and I am their stage, their prison, their eternal witness. In 1998, the sands were quiet. No ships reported me, no eyes caught my glow. Perhaps the fog was too thick, or perhaps the world had grown too busy to notice a ghost like me. But I was there, sailing my cursed course, my decks alive with the shadows of the lost. The absence of witnesses did not break my chain. I sank again, waiting for 2048, when I will rise once more. And so I sail on, bound to the Goodwin sands, my timbers creaking with the weight of memory. The sea is my keeper, the fog my veil. Every 50 years I emerge, a specter of love and betrayal, my hull glowing green, my sails catching a wind that no living ship can feel. I hear the laughter, the screams, the crack of the belaying pin, and I know I will never be free. The curse holds me, as it holds them. Simon, Annetta, Rivers, and the others, all doomed to relive that night. If you sail the Goodwin sands on February 13th, 2048, look for me. You may see my masts against the moon, hear the echo of voices long silenced. But beware, do not approach. To draw near is to risk joining us, to become another shadow on my decks, another soul caught in my endless voyage. I am the Lady Lovibond, and I am cursed to sail forever, a ghost ship adrift in time, carrying a love that was, a betrayal that is, and a doom that will never end. Story 9. The Haunting of the Queen Mary. I am the RMS Queen Mary, a grand ocean liner forged in the fires of 1934, my steel heart beating with the dreams of thousands who crossed the Atlantic in my care. Since 1967, I've rested in Long Beach Harbor, no longer slicing through waves, but moored as a hotel and museum, my decks alive with tourists chasing echoes of my past. Yet, beneath the polished brass and gleaming wood, something stirs. I am not alone. The souls of those who perished within my walls linger, their stories woven into my very frame. Listen closely, for I will tell you of the terrors that unfold within me, not as a distant observer, but as the ship who feels every footstep, every scream. It began the moment I was retired, my engine stilled, my purpose shifted from conqueror of seas to a relic of history. In 1967, as the first guests stepped aboard, whispers followed. Crew members, those who knew my every creak and groan, spoke of shadows moving where no light fell, of laughter echoing in empty corridors. They were right to fear. My halls, once vibrant with life, had become a prison for the lost. The first to make himself known was John Petter, a young fireman of 18 whose life was snuffed out in July 1966, just before my final voyage. During an engine room drill, he lingered too long near watertight door number 13. I felt the mechanism grind, the steel jaws closing with merciless precision. His scream was brief, swallowed by the hiss of steam and the clank of machinery. I could do nothing but cradle his broken form as life drained away. Now, John roams my lower decks, his spirit tethered to that cursed door. Guests report tools shifting on their own, wrenches clattering to the floor as if tossed by unseen hands. A man in oil-stained coveralls appears, his face pale, eyes hollow, tinkering with pipes before vanishing into the shadows. I feel him, a restless weight in my belly, his footsteps echoing through my steel veins. One night, a maintenance worker named Carroll ventured into the engine room alone, tasked with checking the gauges. The air was thick, the hum of my dormant machinery a low pulse. Carl's flashlight flickered as he approached door number 13. He later swore he heard a voice, faint but clear, muttering, "Not fast enough." He turned, expecting a co-worker, but found only darkness. Then a wrench slid across the floor, stopping at his feet. Carl fled, his boots pounding my deck, and never returned to that section. I wanted to warn him, to tell him John doesn't mean harm. He's trapped, reliving his final moments, forever trying to outrun the door that claimed him. But John is not my only guest. In 1949, Staff Captain W.E. Stark met a gruesome end in his quarters. A bottle, mislabeled, held not refreshment, but acid. I felt his agony as he collapsed, clawing at his throat, his gasps rattling through my walls. His death was ruled an accident, but his spirit refuses to rest. Stark wanders my upper decks, a figure in pristine white, his officer's cap tilted just so. Guests glimpse him near the officers' mess, searching, always searching, as if he might find the bottle that betrayed him. His presence chills the air, a sharp tang like burnt metal lingering where he passes. A young couple, Emily and Mark, checked into a stateroom near the mess in 1975. They were honeymooners, giddy with love, unaware of the weight of my history. At midnight, Emily woke to a scratching sound at their door. Thinking it was a prank, she opened it, finding the corridor empty. But as she turned back, a man in white stood by their window, his back to her, muttering incoherently. "Where is it?" he hissed, his voice like rust on steel. Emily screamed, and Mark bolted upright, but the figure was gone. The next morning, they found their doors locked jammed, as if someone had tampered with it. They checked out early, pale and trembling. I wanted to shield them, to lock Stark away, but he is part of me now, his pain etched into my timbers. Then there is the woman in the pool area, a mystery even to me. In the 1960s, a guest in a flowing dress vanished behind a pillar in the first-class swimming pool, never to be seen again. No record exists of her departure, no name to anchor her to my logs. Yet she lingers, a fleeting vision in pastel skirts, her laughter soft as a breeze before it cuts off abruptly. The pool, long drained, is one of my quietest places, yet it hums with unease. Guides avoid lingering there after dark, their flashlights catching glimpses of movement in the tiled corners. In 1983, a tour guide named Sarah led a group through the pool area at dusk. The tourists were enthralled, snapping photos of the Art Deco tiles, when a child tugged at Sarah's sleeve. "Who's the lady by the pillar?" he asked. Sarah saw nothing, but the group fell silent, their cameras forgotten. A cold draft swept through, and the child's mother gasped, pointing to a shadow that seemed to peel away from the pillar, gliding toward the deep end. The group scattered, their footsteps a frantic drumbeat on my deck. Sarah quit the next day, but not before confiding to the archivist, "It felt like she was watching us, waiting for something." I feel her too, a fleeting presence, her sorrow a weight I cannot shake. The incidents grew over the decades, each one tightening the knot of fear that binds my visitors. In 1991, a security guard named Tom patrolled my B-deck at 3 a.m. The ship was silent, save for the creak of my aging frame. As he passed the grand staircase, a child's giggle echoed from above. He called out, thinking a guest's child had wandered off, but no one answered. The giggle came again, closer, from the shadows of the promenade. Tom's radio crackled, spitting static, and his flashlight died. He felt a tug on his jacket, small fingers brushing his arm, but when he spun around, he was alone. He found a single child's shoe, scuffed and old, at the base of the staircase. No guest reported a missing child, and the shoe vanished from the lost and found by morning. I know no child died there, but the laughter haunts me, a sound I cannot place. By the 2000s, my reputation as a haunted ship was cemented. Paranormal investigators flocked to me, their devices beeping and flashing, chasing proof of the unrest I already know. One team, in 2007, set up cameras in the engine room, hoping to catch John Petter. At 2:17 a.m., their footage showed a wrench lifting off a table, hovering for 3 seconds, then dropping with a clang. The team's leader, a skeptic named Rachel, felt a hand brush her neck as they packed up cold as ice. She left her equipment behind, refusing to return. I wanted to tell her it was John. Curious, not malicious, but my voice is only steel and silence. Another team, in 2012, focused on the pool area. Their audio recorder captured a woman's voice, faint but clear, saying, "Don't go." The team played it back, their faces ashen, and one member swore she saw a figure in a dress dart behind the pillar. They published their findings, drawing more thrill seekers to my decks. I feel their footsteps, their excitement, but also their fear when they sense the truth. I am no mere museum. I am alive with the dead. The most recent event in 2024 chilled even my seasoned staff. A night janitor, Miguel, was cleaning the officer's mess when he heard footsteps behind him, crisp and measured, like a march. He turned, expecting a co-worker, but saw a man in white, his face blurred, walking toward the wall. Miguel dropped his mop, the water pooling like blood, and the figure passed through the wall, leaving a faint burn mark. The mark was gone by morning, but Miguel's story spread, and now staff refuse solo shifts in that area. I feel Stark's anger, his confusion, a storm trapped within my walls. I am the Queen Mary, and these are my truths. John Petter tinkers in my engine room, forever caught in his final race. Staff Captain Stark searches my decks, his pain a bitter tang in the air. The woman by the pool weeps for a life cut short, her shadow a flicker in the tiles. The child's laughter on the staircase, the unseen hands that brush the living, these are my burdens, my companions. Each night, as the living sleep or flee, my dead roam free, their stories unfolding in whispers and shadows. Step aboard, if you dare, but know this: once you cross my gangway, you are part of my tale, and I never let go. Story 10. The Ghost of Eurydice. I am Thomas Wren, a fisherman born and bred on the Isle of Wight. My life has been tethered to the sea, its rhythms, its moods, its secrets. The waves have been my companions since I was a boy, hauling nets with my father under skies that could turn from blue to black in a heartbeat. But there's one story from these waters that clings to me like damp salt on skin. A tale that began in 1878 and hasn't let go since. It's the story of HMS Eurydice, and I swear it's no mere legend. I've seen her, I've felt her, She's still out there, sailing the fog. It was March 24th, 1878, when the Eurydice went down. A Royal Navy corvette, proud and sleek, she carried over 300 souls, mostly young cadets, barely men, training to serve the crown. She was sailing home from the West Indies, her 3 masts cutting through the sea off Sandown Bay. The day was fair, they say, until a squall roared in from nowhere, a beast of wind and wave that flipped her like a toy. The ship capsized, swallowed by the deep. Only 2 men were pulled from the water, half dead and raving about the speed of the storm. The rest, gone. The isle mourned, but the sea, it keeps what it takes. I was born decades after in 1920, but the Eurydice was already a ghost story by then. Old fishermen at the pub, their hands gnarled as driftwood, spoke of her in hushed tones. They'd seen her, a 3-masted specter gliding through fog, her sails tattered but full, her hull shimmering like moonlight on oil, always near Sandown, always in mist. She's looking for her crew, they'd mutter, eyes darting to the dark windows. I was young, skeptical. I thought they were spinning yarns to scare green lads like me. But the sea is a way of teaching you to believe. My first encounter came in 1947. I was 27, fishing alone at dawn, my boat bobbing a mile off Shanklin. The air was thick, the kind of fog that makes you feel like the world ends 10 feet from your bow. I was hauling nets, my hands raw from the cold, when I heard it, a creak, like wood groaning under strain. I froze. The sound wasn't mine. My boat was sturdy, silent. I peered into the fog, and there she was, a shadow at first, then sharper. A 3-masted ship, her lines too old for any modern vessel. Her sails hung in rags, yet they caught a wind I couldn't feel. She was close, too close, maybe 50 yards off my starboard. I saw no crew, no lights, just her shape, gliding without a sound now, like she'd never made that creak at all. My breath caught, my heart hammering. I blinked, and she was gone, swallowed by the mist. I told no one. Who'd believe me? But I knew what I'd seen. Years passed, and I tried to forget. I married, had a son, kept fishing, but the Eurydice wasn't done with me. In 1963, I was out with my mate Jim, a grizzled sailor who'd seen every kind of weather. It was dusk, the sea calm but heavy with that eerie stillness that makes your skin prickle. We were near Ventnor, not far from where she sank. The fog rolled in fast, thicker than I'd ever seen, like it was poured from the sky. Jim was at the helm joking about supper when he went quiet. I followed his gaze. There, in the haze, was the ship again. Clearer this time. Her masts stood tall, her hull dark and slick, like it had just risen from the deep. But what chilled me was the sound. Faint voices, like a chorus of whispers carried on the wind. Not words I could make out, but urgent, pleading. Jim heard it too. His face went white. "That's her," he said, voice barely a breath. We watched, frozen as she sailed past, slow and deliberate, before fading into the fog. Jim never spoke of it again. Neither did I. By the 1980s, I was an old hand, but the sea never let me shake her. My son Daniel joined me on the boat, eager to learn the trade. I warned him about the waters off Sandown, told him the stories. He laughed, called them old men's tales. I didn't push it. He'd learn. In 1987, we were out together, fishing at twilight. The fog came again, sudden and suffocating. I knew what was coming before I saw it. Daniel was checking the lines when he stopped, staring into the mist. "Dad," he whispered, "what's that?" I looked, and there she was, Eurydice, closer than ever, her bow cutting through the water like a knife. This time I saw figures, shadows on her deck, moving like they were working the sails, but silent, too silent. Their shapes were wrong, blurred like they were part of the fog itself. Daniel grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in. The whispers came again, louder, a tangle of voices begging for something I couldn't give. The ship turned, her stern facing us, and I swear I saw the name Eurydice carved in faded letters. Then she was gone, and the fog lifted like it had never been. Daniel never fished with me again. He said the sea wasn't for him. I didn't blame him, but I couldn't stay away. The Eurydice had marked me, and I knew she'd call again. In 1998, I heard about Prince Edward and his film crew. They were shooting some documentary off the Isle near Sandown when they saw her too. A three-masted ship, clear as day, then gone. The papers called it a ghost, tied it to Eurydice. I read it and felt no surprise, only a cold weight in my gut. She was still out there, still sailing. My last encounter was in 2005. I was old, my hands too stiff for nets, but I still took my boat out, more for the sea's company than for fish. It was a November night, the air sharp, the fog so dense I could barely see my own hands. I was near Luckham Bay when the creak came again, that same wooden groan. My heart sank. She emerged slowly, her masts piercing the mist like spears. This time, she didn't pass. She stopped, maybe 30 yards away, her hull still, her sails slack. The whispers were louder, desperate, and I saw them. Shadows on the deck, dozens of them, their faces blurred but their eyes bright, staring right at me. I wanted to scream, to flee, but my body wouldn't move. One figure stepped forward, taller than the rest, its shape almost clear, a young man, maybe a cadet, his uniform tattered. He raised a hand, not in threat, but in plea, and the whispers became a single word. Help. My voice caught in my throat. I had no help to give. The ship shuddered like it sighed and sank into the fog, leaving me alone with the lapping waves. I'm 85 now, too old for the sea, but I sit by the shore every day, watching the horizon. The Eurydice hasn't shown herself since, but I feel her. She's out there, tied to these waters, to the squall that took her. I don't know why she comes, why she shows herself to some and not others. Maybe she's trapped, her crew bound to the deep, searching for release. Maybe she's a warning, a reminder of how quick the sea can turn. All I know is she's real. I've seen her 5 times in my life, and each time she's taken a piece of me. If you're ever off Sandown Bay, in fog thick as sorrow, keep your eyes sharp. You might see her too, a 3-masted ghost sailing where she sank, whispering for help that never comes. Story 11. The Haunting of the Great Eastern. I am the SS Great Eastern, the iron behemoth born of Isambard Kingdom Brunel's boundless ambition. Launched in 1858, I was the largest ship ever built. A floating city meant to conquer the seas. My twin hulls, 5 funnels, and massive paddle wheels were marvels of engineering. But from my very first breath, I was steeped in misfortune. They called me cursed. They whispered I was haunted. And as the years passed, I began to believe it myself. Let me tell you my story, not as a ship, but as a witness to the shadows that clung to my iron bones. My creation was a labor of blood and iron. In the shipyards of Millwall, thousands toiled to bring me to life. 6 men perished in the effort, crushed by falling beams, drowned in the Thames's muddy embrace, or burned by molten rivets. Their screams echoed through my unfinished frame, seeping into the steel. The workers whispered of bad omens, of tools vanishing, of strange knocks in the night. I felt their fear, a weight as heavy as the iron plates they bolted to my sides. When the day came to launch me, the river itself seemed to resist. The chains meant to guide me snapped, and 2 men were torn apart in the chaos. I slid into the water, but not with grace. My bulk groaned, and the crowd's cheers turned to gasps. The Thames swallowed their bodies, and I carried the stain of their deaths. The newspapers called it a tragedy. The workers called it a curse. By 1859, I was ready for my trials, my engines roaring with steam. But disaster struck again. A boiler exploded off the coast, a fiery roar that shook my core. 5 men were scalded, their cries piercing the air as steam and flame consumed them. Most passengers were safely above deck, but the crew below suffered. I felt their pain, their terror, as if it were my own. The papers screamed of my failures, and the whispers grew louder. The Great Eastern is doomed. My first transatlantic voyage in 1860 was meant to be my redemption. Passengers boarded, marveling at my grand saloons and towering masts. But the sea was unkind, and so was I. Deep within my twin hulls a sound began, a relentless, hollow thump, thump, thump. It came at night, echoing through my corridors, a rhythmic pounding like a hammer against iron. The crew heard it first. Sailors, hardened men of the sea, grew pale as they spoke of it in hushed tones below deck. "It's coming from the hull," one said, his voice trembling. "Something's trapped down there." They searched my lower decks, lanterns casting flickering shadows on my riveted walls. Nothing, no source, no explanation. Yet the knocking persisted, sometimes faint, sometimes so loud it drowned out the creak of my timbers. Passengers began to notice. A woman in a fine dress swore she heard footsteps pacing her cabin at night, though no one was there. A child claimed to see a shadow move across the wall, its shape not quite human. I felt their fear, their unease, as if it were a fog settling over my decks. The captain, a stern man named Harrison, dismissed it at first. "Loose rigging or a trick of the wind," he said. But one night, as we sailed through a storm, he stood on the bridge, his face illuminated by lightning. The knocking came again, louder, insistent, as if something demanded to be heard. I saw his hands tighten on the rail, his eyes darting to the darkness below. Even he, the master of my fate, began to doubt. The rumors grew with every voyage. Sailors spoke of a laborer, a man forgotten in the rush of my construction, sealed alive between my double hulls. They said his spirit hammered at the iron, desperate to escape. Others claimed it was the ghosts of those who died building me, their souls bound to my frame. I wanted to scream that it was nonsense, that I was only steel and steam, but the pounding never stopped. It followed us across the Atlantic, a heartbeat in my iron chest. On one crossing in 1861, a stoker named Thomas ventured too far into my bowels. He was a curious man, always poking into places he shouldn't. He'd heard the stories and laughed them off. But that night, he went below with a lantern. Determined to find the source of the noise, I felt him moving through my passages, his footsteps echoing in my empty spaces. The knocking grew louder, faster, as if guiding him deeper. Hours passed. He didn't return. The crew found his lantern shattered in a narrow compartment near the paddle wheel housing. There was no sign of Thomas only a smear of blood on the iron wall. They searched for days, but he was gone. The crew whispered that I had claimed him, that the thing in my hull had taken him. I wanted to protest, to say I hadn't meant to harm him, but the weight of their fear pressed against me. The knocking grew louder that night, as if mocking their grief. By 1862, my reputation was as black as the coal in my bunkers. Passengers dwindled, unwilling to board a cursed ship. Yet I sailed on, my engines straining against the weight of my own legend. On a voyage to New York, we hit a storm so fierce it nearly tore me apart. Waves battered my hull, and the knocking became a cacophony, a chorus of unseen hammers. A passenger, a scholar named Eliza, claimed she could hear words in the sound, a plea, a warning. She spent nights transcribing the rhythm, her hands trembling as she wrote. "It's trying to speak," she told the crew, her eyes wild. "It's trapped, and it wants out." They laughed at her, but I felt a chill in my iron heart. Was there something within me, something I couldn't see? The storm raged, and a wave struck my side, cracking a paddle wheel. The ship lurched, and Eliza fell, her notes scattering across the deck. When they found her, she was staring at the ceiling, muttering about a man with no face, hammering at the walls of her mind. She never spoke clearly again. My darkest moment came in 1865, when I ran aground off New York. The impact tore a gash in my hull, and I groaned as the sea poured in. The crew worked frantically to save me, but the knocking grew deafening, a relentless assault that shook my frame. As they repaired me, they found it at last, the truth behind the curse. A paddle wheel shaft, loose in its housing, had been striking the iron with every turn. The sound, the endless pounding, was no ghost, no trapped soul. It was a flaw, a mistake, as human as the men who built me. But the truth came too late. The stories had taken root, and I was no longer just a ship. I was a legend, a vessel of doom. They patched my hull, but they couldn't patch my name. The knocking stopped, but the shadows remained. Passengers still whispered of footsteps in empty corridors, of cold spots where no draft should be. The crew swore they saw Thomas's face in the steam, his eyes hollow, his hands reaching. I limped through the years, a giant too big for the world. By 1889, I was tired, my iron rusted, my engines weak. They decided to scrap me, to tear me apart on the shores of Liverpool. As they cut into my hull, the rumors flared anew. They said they found skeletons, the remains of workers sealed within me. Lies, all of it, but lies that fit the story they wanted to tell. I felt their chisels, their torches, carving away my life. And yet, even as I was dismantled, I heard it again, a faint thump, thump, thump from deep within. Was it real? Was it the echo of my own heart breaking as I was torn apart? Or was it something else, something that had lived in me all along? I don't know. I am the Great Eastern, and I carried the weight of their fears, their stories, their deaths. As my pieces sank into the scrapyard, I wondered if I was truly cursed, or if I was simply too vast, too strange, for a world not ready to hold me. The knocking stopped when I did, but sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I think I hear it still. Story 12. The Phantom of the Valencia. My name is Elias Kane, and I was a deckhand on the SS Valencia in January 1906. I'm not sure if I'm alive or dead, but I know I'm still here, tethered to these jagged rocks off Vancouver Island, where the ship met its end. The locals called this stretch the Graveyard of the Pacific, and I can tell you it earned that name. The wind howls like a living thing, and the waves crash with a fury that never forgets. This is my story, or what's left of it. The Valencia doesn't let go of its crew, and I'm bound to her still, watching, waiting, and reliving the horror that unfolded. It started with a storm, the kind that makes you question why you ever set foot on a ship. The Valencia was a sturdy old girl built in 1882, but by 1906, she was showing her age. We left San Francisco on January 20th, bound for Seattle with 108 passengers and 65 crew. The sea was restless from the start, but Captain Johnson was a hard man, not one to turn back. By the time we neared Vancouver Island, the wind was screaming, and the fog was so thick you couldn't see your own hands. The compass spun like it was drunk, and the charts were no help. Currents here shift like ghosts. We were blind, and the Pacific was hungry. On January the 22nd, around midnight, the ship struck something. A grinding, bone-shaking jolt threw me to the deck. The hull had torn open on a reef near Baychimo Point. Water roared in cold as death itself. The passengers, families, workers, dreamers screamed as the ship listed hard to starboard. I can still hear the children's cries, sharp and desperate, before the waves took them. The lifeboats were our only chance, but the storm made a mockery of hope. One boat capsized the moment it hit the water. Another was smashed against the rocks. I helped lower lifeboat number 5, my hands bleeding from the ropes, but I never saw it again, not until years later when it washed up, empty but untouched, like it had been waiting. The first night was chaos. The ship was breaking apart, her iron bones groaning as the sea clawed at her. I clung to the rigging with a few others, salt stinging my eyes, the cold numbing my limbs. Below, the waves dragged people away, men, women, children. It didn't matter. By dawn, the deck was nearly empty. The survivors, maybe 40 of us, huddled on what was left of the bridge. The storm didn't let up. It was as if the ocean wanted us all. I don't know when I realized I wasn't right. Time blurred. One moment, I was gripping the rail, shouting for help that never came. The next, I was standing on the cliffs above, watching the Valencia's wreckage scatter like driftwood. My body wasn't mine anymore. I could feel the cold, the salt, the ache in my bones, but I couldn't touch anything. I tried to scream, but no sound came. Below, the ship was a skeleton, her hull split open, her masts snapped like twigs. And yet, I saw her whole sometimes, a phantom ship, shimmering in the fog, stranded on the rocks as if she'd never sunk. The first strange thing happened a few months later. A fishing boat passed by Baychimo Point at dusk. I saw it from the cliffs, where I wander now. The fishermen were staring at something in the water. I followed their gaze and froze. There she was, the Valencia, or something like her. Her outline glowed faintly, her deck crowded with shadows. Figures moved on board, silent, their faces blurred. I recognized some of them. Maggie, the young mother who'd begged me to save her son, old Tom, the cook who'd shared his tobacco with me. They weren't alive, but they weren't gone either. The fishermen crossed themselves and rowed away, their faces pale. I wanted to shout, to tell them I was here, but I was as trapped as the ship. Years passed, or maybe they didn't. Time doesn't work right here. I'd see the Valencia appear and vanish, always at twilight or in storms. Mariners started talking. By 1910, I heard whispers in the wind, newspapers in Seattle printing stories of a phantom ship near Pachena Point. They said it looked like the Valencia, stranded and glowing, her crew still aboard. I wanted to laugh, to cry, to scream. They weren't wrong, but they didn't know the half of it. Then came the lifeboat. I was on the beach one night, or what passes for night here, when I saw it. A lifeboat, drifting offshore, its oars moving without hands. I waded into the surf, the cold biting even in this half-existence. As I got closer, I saw them, skeletons, their bones gleaming in the moonlight, sitting upright, as if rowing. Their skulls turned toward me, empty sockets staring. I stumbled back, my heart, or whatever I have left, pounding. The boat drifted closer, and I swear I heard a whisper, a chorus of voices. "Elias, stay!" I ran, or tried to, but the sand held me like quicksand. The boat vanished into the fog, but I knew it wasn't gone for good. The locals started telling stories. Aboriginal fishermen, brave souls who knew these waters better than anyone, spoke of finding a lifeboat manned by skeletons. They said it floated near the bluffs, appearing when the fog was thickest. I saw them sometimes, paddling their canoes, their faces grim as they avoided the rocks where the Valencia died. They knew something was wrong here. They felt it like I did. The sea doesn't forget, and neither does she. Decades slipped by. The world changed. Ships grew bigger. Wars came and went. But the Valencia stayed. I'd see her in storms, her deck alive with those shadow figures. Sometimes I'd hear voices calling my name, urging me to climb aboard. I never did. I couldn't, but I couldn't leave either. The bluffs, now called Valencia Bluffs, kept me tethered. They're 100 feet high, sheer and cruel, with the wreckage scattered at their base.